Welcome to Just Another Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Soderberg. Today, we are joined by Robbie Earl and Kyle Sconowell from the Friends and Work podcast. You can hear it anywhere the podcasts are streamed. The Friends and Work podcast focuses on anything and everything of the MCU or Marvel Cinematic Universe and Marvel in general. They have done a couple episodes on non-Marvel things, but mostly MCU based for a rewatch order they did, plus anything new coming out from Marvel. But this podcast was mainly talked about how they got it started, why they podcast, and then we jumped on to different Marvel subjects and different subjects in general. It's a great conversation with three guys. These guys are great. You should really listen to their podcast, the Friends from Work podcast. Again, streamed anywhere podcasts are available, or you can follow them at the FFW podcast or the FFWpodcast.com. This is Robbie and Kyle and myself, the guys from the Friends from Work podcast. Enjoy. How's it going, guys?
What's up, Justin?
Great. Thanks for having us.
I'm here with Kyle and Robby. So if anybody, I'm gonna put these little on my video. I'm gonna put who's who, but so people can know the voices. If Kyle says hi and then Robby says hi, so people can know who's who.
That sounds like pro level editing right there.
Wow.
Is what it sounds like to me.
And so there's Kyle and Robby here. They have a podcast called the Friends from Work podcast, which is one of my favorite podcasts that's out there right now.
Thank you.
Not to make you guys' heads pretty big, but it's definitely something. And it's one of the podcasts that my wife and I actually can listen to together, or we do it separately. Like she listens to it at work and I listen to mine. So you guys are talking about the movies. We're talking about the podcast about the movies afterwards. So
that's some Inception type stuff. I love it.
She married into the Marvel Cinematic Universe because she wasn't a Marvel fan. Until she met me. And now once we found out about your podcast, I was like, we should listen to this. We should watch the movies. So we watched the movies all together and then we listened to the podcast and we were behind. So we watched fast to get to your current episodes. And then we watched past your episodes and then had to catch up on the podcast.
Oh, nice.
I'll take that as she enjoyed the movies at least enough to want to go faster.
Yes, absolutely. So it's funny because we are trying to watch them again, and I just started playing them on Disney Plus and completely lost track of doing them in an order like your guys' order. The Spider-Man movies aren't in there and stuff like that.
Right.
So those kind of movies aren't on MC or the Disney Plus. So now I'm like, oh, crap, we got to go back and change it.
Right.
And she's like, can we skip Doctor Strange? Because she's not a Doctor Strange fan.
No.
And you'll love it because she says, can we skip Thor the Dark World? So
oh wow.
Okay, now I officially, my respect level for her has gone down.
So it's actually funny. I was gonna say my wife can relate there for sure in terms of marrying into the MCU. Oh, for sure. But the funny thing is for her, it's kind of the opposite in that she always, if she has to watch an MCU movie, she would almost always pick Doctor Strange. That's one that kind of stands out as one of her favorites. So we actually have in our living room, there's only so much Marvel. I have so much Marvel memorabilia, and there's only so much that my wife can, in good faith, allow me to display throughout the house before it just becomes like a high schooler's bedroom. But we do have this poster in the living room that's a Doctor Strange poster because it's kind of the place where we both meet there. So
what's funny for me is Robbie is the expert. He has the posters. He's read comics. He's done the whole thing. I just kind of fell in love with these movies just as movies' sake, the way you were describing your favorite directors. I just kind of started enjoying the whole universe. But my wife, she's not comics, but she's as in to this entire thing as I am. Robbie knows that. So I have a slight advantage there. And she does love Doctor Strange. So she would fight me on that if I said anything negative about Doctor Strange.
That's pretty funny though, as you were saying about how you had a lot of Marvel memorabilia. I can't speak today. I also have a ton of Marvel memorabilia over the years I've collected, and we had a studio. I was talking off air to Kyle that we're having a baby in June, so we're turning my studio / office into a nursery. So
Oh,
I lost my space.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
man.
And now I'm in a place with a black sheet behind, or a backdrop. I feel like Edward Snowden. You don't know where I am, and so
You should have the like blur over your face and the deep
Yes.
voice and everything.
Yeah.
But we decided that all my Marvel stuff was in my office, in my studio. Like I had
Right.
like things in the wall. I had Funko Pops. I had statues.
Right.
And we decided, I'll put it all in that one room, thinking that I'd get a space for myself. And
Right.
then we decided to have a baby. And so then I'm like, well, now I lost all my space for myself. So I slowly started moving things into the living room. Like there's
just bit by bit.
yes, there's a Scotty Young who did this.
Oh, yeah,
artwork. It's a Thanos.
Wow.
Thanos is my favorite character, and so Thanos is standing there.
Amen.
From one of his variant covers. I have that sign on the wall. I've got like small things that I'm just slowly putting out in spots to see if she notices that there's all of a sudden I know where a Stan Lee showed up on our entertainment center. It was great.
Where'd that come from?
Have you read his Fairyland stuff?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So
okay.
So I hate Fairyland. It's unbelievable. He has Middle West as well, and he's doing the new he did the new Strange Academy comics.
Yeah, that's right. Which I haven't read any of those yet, but I know there's been a lot of buzz around them.
But I could, his art is to me is just fun. There's like is a lot of artists, like even in movies, cinematography and all that stuff, where you look at someone, you're like, that could be this person, or it just all blends together. Where Scotty's is so off the wall, but not like, it's like, I don't know, it's simple. It's something about it I really like, cartoonish.
For sure.
Totally.
That's the thing. It's like listening to your podcast, knowing that you're not, Kyle's not that much into comic books themselves, that he likes the movies, that there is this thing, and I feel like there's times with my friends I'm the same way as Robby, where it's like explaining to like someone asking me what's this WandaVision thing. I watched the first 2 episodes and I have no idea what the heck's going on, and I had to go into like one of my favorite series. One of my favorite writers is Brian Michael Bendis, so like
well, you know that I'm with you there.
House of M and all that stuff, and they're like, oh, that makes sense, and so on. But like, it's funny how like I am to most people in my life the Robbies to you guys' podcast, that I have to explain it more in depth from comic books than anything. But
to protect myself here a second, it's not that I dislike comics. Like I don't dislike comics or comic people. I like them a lot. Like I like them in theory. I just I don't read a lot, and B, I just never really dove into it. So I'm kind of just like, I'm fine to not have that be one of my things. But I'm not judging you at all. I just can't add anything to that conversation.
One of these days, I'm gonna send you. I'm always debating what would be Kyle's best jumping on point.
Robby, see, I don't think we even try. I just don't think that's the right way to go about it.
What you need to do is like some of these Marvel Knights videos that have come out. There's basically, it's like comic books that they've cut out the characters from the book and animated it with an audio overlay. It's a DVD that you can buy. I mean, the Eternals would be a great one to get onto because it's obviously based on the movie's coming out. It's super easy to watch, and it's basically the comic book, the series, the latest, not the newest one that just came out last couple weeks ago, but the latest Eternal series. But it's like animated, but not really. They just took the images from the comic book, cut out the people, and are like moving them across the screen. But that way you didn't have to read, cool. Kyle. You could just watch it on TV.
Yeah, there you go.
But yeah, so it's I've loved comic books since I was super young. My dad used to bring me a comic book and ginger ale when I wasn't feeling good.
Man,
and, that kind of thing. So, which is a tradition.
Sounds like a good father.
With my kid, is here's a comic book.
Right.
And I'll probably just grab it from my collection, not even have to buy a new one. But like, here's a comic book.
That's awesome.
So to back up a little bit, Kyle and Robby run a podcast, like I said, called Friends from Work. Just so people who don't know, it's a podcast about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, really. I mean, it's unofficial MCU podcast. You guys have talked video games, you've talked non-MCU movies, but Marvel movies, and you did Dark Knight for one of them too as a fan. You guys did the summer series, which is pretty cool.
Thanks.
But the really basis around your podcast is MCU, and that's why obviously people can tell by why we're talking comic books and Marvel, is because that's what your podcast is about. Do you guys, so I don't want to do a question and answer thing, but like, tell me how you guys got your podcast started. That's what I really want to know as a podcast person as well. So how did it end up coming into fruition?
I'll start here, and I want to tie this back into the conversation about your wife, which is that Robby and I, obviously, when we decided to start this podcast, have done a ton, countless hours of talking of what's our focus, what's our demographic, like who's listening, what's our audience. Um, and the conclusion we've come to is like, I think it's people like you and your wife, where we think our podcast is best at adding a level of joy to these movies for someone who's maybe not seen them before or only seen them once or is kind of half in. Our favorite thing is when we get texts from people that were like, I'm not sure if I like this or if I should watch it. And then we say, here's the order, like, listen to this, let's go watch it. And then they come back and say they love it. The movies, I mean.
Mhm.
So if our podcast can enhance the MCU for other people, that was kind of our goal. So it's kind of people like your wife that basically, that was our demographic kind of, we thought. So
Right.
Go ahead, Rob.
Well, and because specifically what you mentioned earlier, like Kyle and I's different perspectives coming into it.
Yes.
Where like I didn't even realize, whenever Kyle and I were touring together, which I should say is sort of how we met each other. We used to be touring musicians together for years, and then kind of reconnected for this podcast. But when we were touring, I didn't know Kyle to be like a huge Marvel fan. Whereas I had grown up like you, Justin, where I'd grown up on a lot of comics, specifically kind of Spider-Man stuff. And so it was really fun to find in these last few years how much Kyle, who I knew not to be kind of naturally drawn to superhero stuff, how much he had gotten into and gotten really passionate about these movies. And that's what made it fun, because I realized, like what he's saying, that I think a lot of people write them off as just these like another superhero movie. And like we talk about this all the time on the podcast, how people bunch every superhero movie together. So you're dealing with like Fantastic Four and Aquaman and Ghost Rider and all of those, and people think of like everything as kind of being of the same nature and sometimes quality. And so the fact that like I was having so much fun talking to Kyle about these movies kind of inspired me to sort of want to reach out to other people like that and kind of be an evangelist for these in some sense, because I realized that like if you just sit down and kind of give them a fair shot, which I think is what we found, like a lot of people write them off really having no sense of what they even are.
Well, and realizing that there's strengths and weaknesses of each one, that they can't just be thrown together.
Exactly. Yeah. For better or for worse. Yeah. And yeah, it's just been, like you said, it's been a blast, because we started this just as these long conversations where we would talk for like 2 hours on my commute home from work. And then it just sort of dawned on us that these were conversations that we felt like people that either were already into these movies would maybe enjoy being a part of, or again, like people that maybe hadn't known the right way or the right lens through which to watch them. And so part of the big part of our season 1 was this rewatch. And I think you mentioned earlier, like a watching in a particular order, because I've always thought that there is this one kind of grand narrative that the MCU does this really great job of telling, but it can get lost with the way that the release order sort of all the politics of the studio and whatever's going on there, where people can forget where all the moving pieces are. But when you can view it as that, I think it's one of the most successful narrative structures in the history of film.
In hindsight, it's kind of wild what you said earlier, that yeah, we were friends for so long and we never really touched on this. I don't know why we didn't. Like, this was all going on during that friendship and we never really dove into it. But I think that was one of the major factors in starting the podcast in the first place, is like Robby and I had kind of fallen out of talking to each other, not in a bad way, but he had moved away and I was here in Nashville still. And then, yeah, when Endgame came out, we just started texting. And I was like, dude, I haven't talked to you in forever, but I just watched Endgame and I know you like this, blah, blah. Well, anyways, I finally said, can I call you real quick? Like, I haven't talked to you in 3 years. And I called him, and Robby's correct. Like, I specifically remember where I was. It led to like a week of every night about a 2-hour phone call about what is it about this movie that's like, I love so much, that's bothering me so much, like in a good way. And finally, like what couple weeks of doing that is when
Right.
we were like, maybe we could actually find something in this that other people would enjoy. So that's kind of what got the the wheels turning a little bit.
Right.
And it's funny how you say that, because I feel like one of the things I always talk to people about is why do a podcast and why, put it out there for people to listen to. And I'm like, well, a lot of us who do podcasts like to talk. Like, you guys are obviously not people who are shy about talking. And if you're
Fair.
going to talk about something, you might as well record it so other people can listen to the conversation and maybe have some input on, whether it's on social media or just friends.
Right.
Mhm.
And so when I went to start my podcast, I was like, well, what would I go around? And then I was like, well, I have like 3 or 4 big passions. I mean, MCU, Marvel is one of them, beer.
Mhm.
But I feel like beer I can't do consciously, because I can't talk negatively or positively about other breweries
Oh,
and
right.
still feel like I can do my job correctly. So I don't want to sit there and like be like, this beer is crap, because I can't, because it looks bad
Yep.
on my work.
Right.
But and then there's other ones, like I'm a big basketball fan, huge Celtics fan. So like, but
Oh,
I was like a
nice.
movie fan, all that stuff. So I'm like, why don't I just talk to random people about the subject? I'm never going to talk about something that I don't care about, because I won't have
Right.
anything to say. So I'll just start doing this conversation about different
Hmm.
things. And that's where, like I mentioned earlier, about my friend who owns a theater type place in Bangor where we talk movies. And he is a film buff. Like, I mean, his top 10 director list was like, we had one common director, that was Quentin Tarantino. Like, that's
Oh,
the
nice.
only
Nice.
person we had common. And so, like, in his Christmas movies, he had like slasher movies like Brazil and all that stuff on it, which obviously I didn't have on. So it's like, it's nice to have that opposite end, and it's not completely opposite with you guys. So obviously there's a common core passion there, but like, there's this comic book view, there's this
Oh,
non-comic book
100%.
view, there's this
Right.
like long-term love, there's this short-term love. And so that's pretty cool about that. Like, it's like a way to have a good conversation. It's like why Pardon the Interruption went for so long. Like, there's these different
Mhm.
shows
Mhm.
that went
A
for so
reference
long
Robbie
that,
wouldn't get that I would, by the way.
but like the idea that
Is that a Barstool podcast?
oh no, it's a
No,
sports thing.
it's a sports thing.
Okay, see,
But
I'm
it's like
trying.
they argued and debated on things, and they gave both sides of things. And obviously, on sometimes they didn't. They probably had the same opinion, but had to go both ways just to get the conversation going. If
Mm.
it's natural, like if it's just one of those things that Robbie can bring in the comic book background, which is kind of cool. And also, like, one of the ways I pitch MCU to people is that you don't need to
Yep.
know these backgrounds, because of the
Exactly.
fact that
Right.
A, the movies are written so well and done so well, but B, they're loosely based on the comic books. It's not like
Right.
they're not like, it's not what MCU movie, when you leave the theater, you don't go, the book was better, like you do with
Right.
screenplays that are adapted from books, because it's loosely based on it for a number of
That's such a
reasons
good
we've talked
point.
about. We
Well,
talked
and
about studio own rights and all those things change the way it's done, but
Mhm.
also the way they take
Right.
liberties, and the fact that the Marvel's been around for 75 years. So it's like,
Right.
you can do some different stuff.
Well, and we've said this many times on our own podcast, but that is kind of what we want our target audience to be. It's that person that maybe like comics, like they're not crazy in depth into comics on one hand, or they maybe
Mhm.
not be fully like movie critic, like your friend movie buff, but just like a person who has dabbled in these interests. And I think Robbie actually does a really, really good job for me as like my counterpart of being the guy who brings in that comic knowledge, but like he does a really good job of being self-aware and never letting it get too like nerdy, or like, not that nerdy is a bad thing, but he has a good filter there. And if he doesn't filter it, then I usually say, okay, hold on, we're getting way
Which I
too
appreciate. Which I appreciate.
and so that's the other thing I'd say is like, I've done a couple podcasts in the past, and I realized that if you're going to do it with somebody, like who that person is got to be so specific and so perfect and just right. You think like, hey, just because I'm having a conversation with a friend, that would work, but there's so many other factors, like the chemistry, how to play off somebody, when to stop somebody, when I can interrupt them, when I can't, when should I let him go, like what's Robbie's strengths, what's my strength, what's my weakness, his, etc. There's a lot more factors that as we've done this, I've realized more and more like Robbie is my perfect counterpart. So there you go, Rob.
Wow, thank you. No,
Yeah.
I've like Candace and I talked about this in the same way, because I think like if I were one, I'm impressed by your kind of initiative and your ability to host this on your own. Because I feel like for me, that would be such a challenging thing, if only because I have this tendency to and Kyle knows this, overthink things, and I will go down all these rabbit holes, and I feel like I would just have no idea how to actually kind of zoom out and do things structurally, which is something that Kyle's really good at. And so I think that like that's such a good word, because I think finding, for me, the biggest things are finding the right person, like you said, and then also finding the thing that if you weren't recording, you would be talking about anyway.
Yes.
Like I think sometimes like you can tell when it's forced with people, like when it's like they just want to be talking about something, which is fine. But like those are the podcasts that I feel like I don't stick with. The podcasts that I've found myself sticking with in the past is when you can like feel the person's like energy and love for whatever they're discussing, like kind of coming through the speakers. And so I think that's what led us to this, which is why we've had so much fun with it, is it's never felt like it takes a decent amount of time, but it's never felt like a chore or like work, because it's just, we have a blast talking about it because we love it.
And you can give yourself an excuse to watch MCU over and over and over again too. Because
Right.
I mean, there's possibilities, and a couple of years down the road, if you're still doing this podcast, that you're like, okay, we're gonna watch again and find what's different about it this time, because there is. I'm watching it again right now, and as a comic book fan, I am still relating. I watched Civil War again last night, and relating it to what I just read Civil War again, the comic book, and like the idea that there's this one lady speaks to Tony Stark and says that her son died in Sokovia. It's one person. I mean, obviously more people die, but this is what turns Tony to the point to do the superhero registration acts and all that stuff, is this one lady and this one person. Whereas realistically in the comic book, it's like 60 people's kids die. Like there's like this way more of a weighted thing to do it. Like Tony just like kind of flicks a switch with one person's story. And obviously it is bigger than that, because like more people died in Sokovia and all that stuff. But like the idea in the comic book, you're like these reality TV show of superheroes kills a bunch of people. They basically, because the villains blew up and all this other stuff. But there's just a lot more pressure on them to do what they did in the movie. And they did it well. It's the same thing with Iron Man, and the idea that it wasn't, the Middle East or overseas where they filmed and did Iron Man. It was in China, really, what they based it off of originally, or Japan. I forget which one it was, but like the storyline behind it wasn't. They modernized it to make it so that's different than the comic book,
right?
But also still relevant to today. I mean, that's, like I said, they did so well on that, and that's on my podcast that I did recently with the directors, top 10 directors. In my top 10 directors now there's 3 people who have done Marvel Cinematic Universe movies now, which is really weird to say, because like there are so many good directors. I mean, I left off like Alfred Hitchcock and all that stuff, because it's like they're not extremely relevant to me as a I'm 34 years old person. But like I put the Russo brothers in there at number 9 just because I mean I can watch their movies over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And the superhero genre is put into a one category, when really if you look at MCU, there's the heist movies, there's the political movies, there's the comedies. And I put Taika Waititi was number 2 for me. Number 2.
Oh wow,
dude! Taika,
mainly because of his future. Like I feel like what he has for him in his future, as the movies he's done so far, and the way he's been able to create comedy and seriousness in a movie, has given me love. And Thor Ragnarok is my wife's favorite movie of all time, not just MCU.
Oh
movies.
wow!
She will watch Thor Ragnarok
now.
all the time, and it's just the comedy that's in it, but also the storyline and the seriousness behind it. And there's alcoholism in there. There's there's comedy. There's drama. There's war. There's everything in it. And
colonialism. Yeah,
and to think about it, it's a comic book movie or superhero movie, and that's what you can get out of it. It's crazy.
My wife is on the same page there as well. She really loves Ragnarok. It's really funny because Kyle and I were guests on another podcast last week, and the hot take from one of our hosts was that Ragnarok is what in his bottom 3 MCU films, which is I'm still just shell shocked by.
There's just so much in it. There's
my
just
wife loves it mainly because there's Chris Hemsworth shirtless and the short haircut. So that's not a huge downside.
And it's just like, and again, they made a movie that had like again, you guys are big music people, so like the music in it like did a lot to it as well, and the themes behind it. But it's like there's just something about it to have someone who's not really into to comic books, but likes movies and had other favorite movies of all time, Grease and all those other movies, to have Thor Ragnarok become one of those things. First of all, was like,
Right.
yeah, I picked the right
Right.
person. But then it was like it's more along the lines on how MCU has been able to succeed so far, whereas other places like DC haven't. It's just they don't have this connection that's drawing in people from outside the comic book fandom.
On the director
Right.
conversation, because now I'm thinking about it, because you said that. One, I don't even know if I could go 10 deep. First of all, that's a huge list. Secondly, I'm thinking to myself, I wonder how many movies I'd have to fall in love with. You said like you banked a lot of it on Taika's future. That's interesting. Because like,
Well,
I wonder, like, I usually feel like 3 maybe is where I start being like, okay, who was this director? Like for me, Dennis Villanueva. It took me watching Prisoners, like, oh, I like that movie. It's really intense, but you know, I like a lot of stuff he did. And then I watched Arrival and I was like, okay, who did Arrival? And then finally, when I start looking this up, I'm like, okay, there's a common theme here, but it's just interesting. I wonder how many I'd have to say. Like the Rousseau brothers, I'm obsessed with, as you know, if you listen to our podcast, with the movies they did in the MCU, but I don't have a ton of history with them outside of the MCU. So is
And they
that
don't
enough
have
to
a
put them in
huge-
my list?
They did do the pilot for Arrested Development.
Right.
So if
And
you're Arrested
they're from
Development fan,
Community too, aren't they?
and
yes,
Community.
they did.
Yeah.
But I just like Arrested Development is one of my favorite TV shows of all time, and it's like they did the pilots, also pretty cool. But I did the
Which
same
is
thing with David
fascinating.
Fincher, and that's why I got to David Fincher, because like I went through the list of movies that I would watch over and over and over again. Even Seven, a very disturbing and gross movie,
Right.
is a movie that I'd put on and be like, oh, let's watch this tonight. And then I was like, who did this? And then he also did Mindhunter on Netflix.
Uh-huh.
Show
interesting.
about yeah. It's so
he,
he did
he
a
worked on a lot of season 1 House of Cards as well.
House of Cards as well. So it's like there's a
Yeah.
lot of great things. And so when you look at and you love these movies and you go, there's got to be a common core thing. And it's like, well, the directors are all the same, so that probably has anything. And Jon Favreau slipped in there somewhere. I think he was either 8 or 7 because of obviously Iron Man, Elf, and then you have
Right.
Chef.
Chef. It's
man.
one of my
Yeah.
favorite movies. And it's not like classically great movies, but just this family oriented. It's upbeat. It's I don't know. There's something about it.
Now
And
you'd have to add Mandalorian credits to it. Now.
and that's what I'm saying. Then you add Mandalorian in it. What I will say is the remakes of The Lion King and Jungle Book were suspect, but other than that, he's really
Right.
created movies, like kicked off the MCU, created one of the last cult classic Christmas movies.
Christmas
I mean,
movies.
Right.
Yeah.
and then you had something like
The greatest one.
Mandalorian that's come out,
Yeah.
and it's like it's something about him. So that's why I was like, oh, he's a great actor too. He's fun in his movies. So like
Right.
there's something
Yeah,
about
so
Jon
fun.
Favreau. And then I put Martin Scorsese in there, and Quentin Tarantino was in there, Tim Burton was in there, and
Right.
but he had like there was movies that people had to like look up afterwards because I couldn't have
Yeah.
no idea. Some like French new wave film director, and I'm like,
Right.
you're going too far into this. I was just
Yeah,
looking, I like
yeah.
this movie.
I'm out. Yeah, he'd probably lose me a little bit there too.
And that's like I said, that having that banter back and forth on someone who can
Right.
speak on something I can't speak on. I mean, if you guys had the exact same viewpoint and the exact same background over and over and over again, it'd be the same thing. Oh yeah, House of M. Oh yeah, Civil War. And there would
Right.
be no discussion. It would just be agreements the whole time.
Right.
For me, I think the best part of the podcast with Robby is that, like, if I bring anything, I think it's the joy, it's the passion, it's the energy. And I think to myself, like, if I was hosting a podcast with somebody like me, it would just be too much. Like I wouldn't want this battle of like matching energy, kind of like going on behind the scenes. But Robby brings like this calm knowledge. And so I love going on these like rants where I can't even keep up with my brain. I'm stumbling over words as I'm talking so fast. I'm so excited about it. And then Robby comes back with some like really great nugget that he found, or like a really great way to say something that I couldn't. And so that's where I feel like he completes me on the podcast, at least.
Which is, yeah, I mean, it's fun because on the other hand, there'll be days where it's like I'll just be like drained from work or whatever, and I know we have to record, and I'm like, oh man, like I know we have to do it today, but I just don't know if I have it in me. And then I come on and Kyle just like lights up with his energy, and I'm like, oh wait, no, I'm totally, and it totally brings me into it. So yeah,
That's awesome.
You're right. It's like having someone to kind of like the complimentary factor, I think, is big, but also, yeah, having someone from just a different viewpoint, which I also, yeah, I mean, I think just in general, like Kyle and I wind up agreeing on a lot of things, but there are some things we disagree on, and we still have, like, it's never like there's never anything wrong with that, right? Like we can do that and have a good time talking about it and just kind of agree to disagree on things. And part of me just sort of likes having a space for that, because it's not like there's just a ton of that going on in the world these days anyway.
Robby has an inherent trait that I don't have, to get into crazy defense mode if he feels like I am attacking one of these MCU things. So if I say anything about it, he'll even be like, yeah. And then the next sentence is about to be, but here's why not, and blah, blah, blah. And then if I'm like, no, dude, you were on the page with me, like on the phone before we did this on the air. And you're like, yeah, but I was thinking about it and this and this. It's like, he cannot resist defending it. So, and I love it. But I'm just saying, if I say something negative, he's right there, ready to go.
It is funny because sometimes I feel like listening back to episodes, I've even brought up issues before, and then you agree with me,
talk yourself out of them. Yeah, it's like in the course of 30 seconds, you're like, you know what? Yeah, just scratch that. I don't think that anyways.
It's funny, but the thing about it is, you guys both are in agreement that the fact that the majority of these movies are good. Like there's like even the worst MCU movies are still better than some other movies that you'd watch on a regular basis, and that's just cool about it, and something that they've been able to do, and something like you guys talked about in a recent episode about how it's kind of almost scary and wonder whether or not, Kyle talks about this a lot, which is whether or not they can continue doing it, and
right.
Part of me goes, maybe this pandemic was good for that, to give them,
that's fair.
There's like no recent memory of, maybe you're rewatching it, but there's no recent memory of a new thing that, maybe WandaVision, if it would have come out right on the heels of Spider-Man, you might have actually felt a little bit different about WandaVision than you would thinking about it now. And like you guys talked about, everybody should go listen to their WandaVision, preparing podcasts that are out there, like Legends,
and go listen to our episode 1 and 2 episode.
Oh yeah, exactly. But I was saying is the idea behind before, when you guys were talking about going into it, and then about how it's a big swing, like it's like a huge swing, and then when you watch the first 2 episodes, you guys are in agreement. You should listen to their podcast about the episodes. But the idea that even people now are like, what the hell was that? Like, they don't. It's like, to me, when I watched the first episode, and I'm glad they did too, was getting me geared up for the second one, being like, okay, the first episode, they need that second one to really, explain what's going on in the first episode. And even in the second episode, they did a little bit, like they broadened it a little bit, but they didn't, it still was like, what the hell is going on? Like, you still didn't know.
Those big swings, that's art to me. I mean, that's what I talked about in the episode on Monday. Like, that's you with beer, right? Like you said, you were developing a key lime pie beer. Like, people aren't doing that because you want to push the boundary and do something. And I always bring up on our podcast, if you just want the same thing, I'm not belittling you, but you already have that. Like, go watch Wanda in Age of Ultron. Like, you have it. Like, if they don't push the ball down the road, we're going to crush them for doing the same thing over and over and getting formulaic. But then when they push the ball down the road, some people are like, whoa, this is too different. And I'm like, that's what I want. That's what I didn't. Yeah. I have, go listen to our episodes. You hear me rant about that a lot, but that's what I appreciate about WandaVision. It is a huge swing. It's on the level of the way Ragnarok was a huge swing in changing Thor's character, and the way Guardians was like, what? I'm going to care about a movie about a raccoon in a tree.
But the huge swing also is a bigger swing when you make it a TV show and it's episodic and they don't know the end, because like, at least with Thor Ragnarok, you went to the theaters, you got a beginning and an end in a sense. Like you knew the character that was at the beginning of Thor Ragnarok, and you saw the character at the end of Thor Ragnarok. But WandaVision is like, you saw the characters for, what is it, 29-minute episode and a 37-minute episode.
Yeah, right.
But they haven't culminated it yet. Like there's no telling you why it was like at the beginning.
Like
we have to find out on Friday.
Right.
And it's like, and maybe we won't even find out more on a Friday. Maybe it's not, we're not really going to find out until episode 9. And that's the even bigger swing to me, that it wasn't a movie, that it's a TV show, and they're stepping outside that box and doing it. I don't know.
And that's another reason why we ended up doing the podcast about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is because me coming not from the comic background, I'm watching these things, like you said, it's a huge swing, right? And every time they take a huge swing, I'm objectively going, wow, they execute this really well. Like, there's going to be some misses. There's going to be some swings and misses, no doubt. But that's what I said in this Far From Home episode. When are they going to run out of good stories? Like, somehow they keep finding a way to keep somebody who's not into the comics so interested. And the execution, like we talk about on Monday, is just, it's perfect almost all the time. I don't know. Kevin Feige, I guess, has got the up top. He's just got the vision for this, but I just can't believe that on the ground level they can continuously execute this at the level they do.
Yeah. I mean, so this is actually one of the things that I think makes Marvel Studios so different from other even other studios that have made Marvel films, is that like they recognize that this is its own medium, that it's its own piece of art. And this is something I've talked about, for years with like Lord of the Rings, right? Like they're big Tolkien fans that take a lot of issue with the Lord of the Rings films, which is crazy to me because I feel like
they're objectively great. Yeah.
right. I mean, and so it's this annoying thing where anytime someone walks out of a movie that's based on some level on another medium, they're immediately like, oh, well, it didn't do this and it didn't do this. And like, I'm mad because I wanted to see this particular scene in this exact way. And I just think that that's such a strange complaint because it's like, you have that, like you have that already. You wanted to see it adapted into something, which means inherently that it's not just going to be copied and pasted. And if it were, like what Kyle said, I think you would be leaving feeling maybe like have this moment of, wow, that was so cool to see that moment translated. And then you would kind of feel, I think, unsatisfied because like it's, part of this is the discussion we had with Endgame when we first started talking. And I think that's why that movie is such a perfect finale to the whole Infinity Saga and why it sums up so much of what we love about what Marvel Studios does. Is a lot of comic book fans, I think, took a lot of issue with that movie for various reasons. But critically, and I think, I mean, obviously, commercially, it was a massive, massive hit. And I think it's because people like when you're trying to make art like for the sake of making good art. And I know that that's kind of funny to say in the context of superhero movies, but I think that's sort of the point here. Like, when you just try to cater to what you think this particular slice of like superhero comics fans want again and again, you wind up with exactly the kind of formulaic superhero movies that most people assume all of them are going to be. And so it's by like taking big swings like WandaVision, where I think you start to get buy-in from people. Like my sister, for instance, has never seen, I think she saw like Iron Man, right? Like way back in the day. But now like she wants to get into the MCU because she's a huge I Love Lucy fan, which is the craziest, like jumping off point. Right.
That's just the craziest period. That's where we start.
Yeah, no, crazy. But you see the WandaVision commercials and it's like clearly an homage to this kind of golden era of television. And so, not saying that there's a massive audience out there that's like, oh yeah, the MCU because of how much I love black and white TV. But I do think it's funny that, I mean, Kyle, you were even talking about your in-laws not really being into it, but enjoying watching WandaVision with you. I think it's like that's how you expand, and that's how you like. I would always rather a big swing and a miss than some kind of carefully calculated, just like right down the middle, same old thing.
Because it's the same
really
thing.
Quick, two tiny disclaimers we always have to add. One, I think the people you're talking about, Robbie, with the backlash is a very small faction of people. Like the people who dislike Ragnarok is tiny. It's got 97% whatever, critic and audience and blockbuster, commercial success, etc. The second thing is that I totally forgot my second thing was. So that was my second disclaimer. I don't remember. So there you go. It's a tiny faction of people. What were you just talking about? No, I can't remember. Dang it.
I figured that I was about to spur a Last Jedi conversation from you.
I gotta avoid that. I should have written it down. My bad. That's awkward. Go ahead.
That was the idea that I worked at Circuit City. So I was in computer repair for a number of years before I went into the beer industry, and I worked at Circuit City.
Nice.
And one of the things that we failed at as a company, or not me personally, because I was an employee, but like that we didn't grow after year. They were a billion-dollar company, but it was like every year was the exact same amount of money. And like in any business, you can't make the same amount of money every year, or you're gonna go out of business. And the same thing with not taking financial dollars from Marvel Cinematic Universe, but if you create the same thing over and over and over again, it's just going to be stagnant, and you're not going to grow as a company or as a film industry. And that's something they've been able to do is look at how much money Endgame, nearly $3 billion. But then you come back and you're like, okay, now how do we reinvent ourselves? How do we start phase 4? How do we do this in a certain way? And let's try new things. And with WandaVision, they were able to do that. And they didn't just like slowly tiptoe into it. And people, I won't give away much anyway, but like it was 4:3 letter. It wasn't like they filmed
it's a
it.
High dive off the top. Yeah.
It's not even just like they went in black and white, because back in the day, previews were black and white. They put it in letterbox. I mean, they put it 4:3.
Exactly.
So like in the day and age that the Endgame came out in 4K Ultra HD, like you come out with a TV show on on Disney Plus, which streams in that high quality, with a TV show that looks like it was filmed back in the 50s and 60s. It's like they went all the way in.
Absolutely. My second disclaimer, which I remember, is that it's not that we always think everything is perfect, right? So I feel like if you're listening to us talk, you may think that we're just saying, oh, if it's a huge swing and you felt like it missed, we're saying you're wrong because they're always right. Like no, there are things where I'm like, okay, that objectively didn't land. So that's the second disclaimer. But for the most part, we do appreciate the swing more than the result of what happens. And then, yes, with WandaVision, we talked about on Monday, I think, we talked about previewing the show, all these things on paper, right? We had said, hey, they're going to honor different, sitcom eras, and they're going to do a black and white thing. And so I think I knew it, but then when I actually watched it, it still blew me away how all out they went with it. Like, it's different actually seeing it. Like you said, the black and white, the 4:3, the era of the house, the way the actors even acted, the dialogue, the plots, like the plot being a miscommunication thing is such a 1950s like sitcom.
Right.
The fact that they wrapped up the show on the couch, like reflecting like, oh, that all worked out.
Right.
Just, I mean, the music, the practical effects, like they went all out. So that was what was impressive to me.
The studio audience. Yeah. I mean,
the studio. I mean, I could go on. I'm not even naming all of it.
And it's funny for me because we get this thing where obviously the pandemic, we've been home a lot more. We've been watching a lot more TV. And so like we do this thing where it's like watch a serious thing after dinner, like at night to like close the end of the night out. We did X-Files. We've been rewatching X-Files.
Oh, nice.
X-Files. Or like, something along those lines. It's like a serious thing to watch that's not comedy based or whatever. But like if we're gonna like sit down right after dinner, right before dinner, and watch a quick episode of TV, it's usually a comedy just to get our lighthearted after work thing. And we're rewatching Parks and Rec right now, and it's funny because the really mean, weird, odd person who's like the campaign running lady in Parks and Rec is
Catherine Hahn.
What's Agnes, or what's her name is it Agnes in the TV show? Or
it's Agnes in the TV show.
Yeah. So Agnes is her. So we're watching and we're like, no, she's a evil person. What the hell? And it's the same thing when we watch Christmas Chronicles after watching Guardians of the Galaxy 2, and my wife goes, yeah, but no, he's ego, he's horrible, he can't be and that connection and that overlay and that stuff. But it's like, so we're watching right now, we literally watched an episode of Parks and Rec where Catherine Hahn was in, and then we watched WandaVision. I'm just like, this is a weird little connection here, this is not right.
That's fun.
But yeah, they did a great job with it. I think that I think it's one of those things that people have to, same thing when I'm a big Walking Dead fan. And I think one of the things people jump off Walking Dead after watching the first 2 or 3 episodes. And it's like, I feel like you need to get a whole season in. So I feel like one of these things, and one of the benefits that Marvel's going to have with these one-off seasons potentially is watch the whole season. The whole season is a movie. It's just split up. Like, if you were able to watch Endgame in multiple segments, but they were able to put it together correctly, they would have done it that way in a sense. Like, it's a movie versus a TV show, but like watch the whole thing, use it as a whole. Like, wait till the end to make your judgment, because there's gonna lay something out, and we've known they've swung and hit home runs more than they've missed. That this is probably gonna be a home run. It's just you have to wait to see it finish.
I'll be fascinated to see how that works with other shows like Falcon and the Winter Soldier, because WandaVision, if there ever was a show to be like episodic, it's that show, because they're literally recreating a sitcom. So like there is a beginning and the end to each little episode. But something like Falcon and the Winter Soldier, will it truly be like what you're saying, a movie split up into 6 hours or whatever? And then how does that flow? So because even like a show, like we were talking about this the other day, even a show like Stranger Things, Netflix decided to release them all at once. So you could just go watch the entire 9 hours in the first, 9 hours you have it. Whereas Disney has taken a different route with this, which is a little more throwback to like what I used to watch Lost and The Office with. So that'll be new. That'll be new to us, and just getting used to that format, in general.
Oh, I'm wondering if the Mandalorian didn't do so well episode like with releasing week to week to week, if they would have changed things. Like if it didn't hit as hard as it did, that if Marvel would have been like, nope, we're gonna still do episodes, but it's all gonna release on one day. But because the Mandalorian kicked butt so much on that, they were just like, oh, we're just going to keep on going and see how it goes. Because we definitely moved away from that with, like you said, the Stranger Things or any TV shows nowadays that are on Netflix or Hulu or any of these things. 99% of them are just released all at once and you can just binge watch them. That it's not server based, because when the Mandalorian season finale hit, it crashed the server.
I didn't know
Disney
that.
Plus, because it was like midnight or whatever, because it was like late enough in the East Coast time for people still be watching it, but like early enough on the West Coast time that people were starting to get into it. So like the most people were watching it at like midnight, and it crashed for like a millisecond because of that. So it's like, imagine if all the episodes were on there.
Oh gosh,
it had to be like a completely different thing. So
well, and I really like that they chose to do it that way. I followed Game of Thrones, week to week like that on HBO. And that was one of those really fun things where everyone was necessarily on the same page, right? Like it wasn't this thing where someone had watched it all through in one day and everyone else was trying to kind of catch up. Like it was just, I think one of the things, again, I mean, the reason why we started the podcast is the community around the stuff is really fun. It's generally like we talk about kind of backlash, but like I think I would have expected us to encounter a lot more kind of trolls through like our social media and stuff, and people that are just like, because some people just like to hate on things, and we really haven't. I mean, like,
no,
it's so fun how many people, whenever you're just like, you know what, let's kind of just talk about this thing that we all love, how it's just a pretty supportive, like fun community, especially through this past year that's been, objectively pretty rough for a lot of people. And so I really like, not saying that Disney, had this sort of spiritual motive here, but I do like what it means. I like that it makes something inherently more communal and less of a like individual journey, because we're all kind of now having this week between episodes 1 and 2 and episode 3 to kind of talk about our first reaction, and then we'll all be able to meet back up after episode 3 and have the same conversation before episode 4.
And I think the anticipation will be fun. Like when I used to watch Lost back in the day, that's not only were we all on the same page, like you're saying, because you only could watch to the most recent episode. You something builds when you have to talk about it and theorize and wait.
Right.
And it's like eating a 5-course meal. It's like, you got to wait a little bit. Sometimes like your hunger builds. So like by the time Friday rolls around, I'll be really ready to watch the next episode. So there is a level of that too, I think.
And I think we did for Mandalorian, we watched the whole first season. Again, they're not long episodes and it's not a long season. The night before, 2 nights before, like the whole week leading up to the first episode of the second season. And we'll probably, I wouldn't imagine they're half an hour episodes so far from WandaVision. There's no reason why Thursday night I can't throw on both episodes before I go to bed. Right. And then Friday watch the new episode. So I have it. You're still like, you're growing up, and every time, as we get to the 9th episode, maybe Wednesday night I watch a couple, Thursday night a couple, and then Friday night the last one, and then the new one, so that I'm like watching it like a movie, but able to decompress and talk about it with someone like you guys on your podcast. When you mentioned that there's not a lot of trolls too, I think one of the best things about doing a podcast about a specific subject is no one's listening to your podcast who doesn't like the MCU.
Yeah, true.
Like, you're not going to have someone who listens to your podcast who's like a humongous DC fan and hates Marvel, and just trolls you for it, because that's just there's so many different places out there to get entertainment. There's no one forcing you to do it. Unlike news nowadays, where there's like 4 or 5 legitimate networks that say things, and you have to tune into one of them, and then you control them because it's that one place you can get the information. Whereas like one of the cool things about someone who listens to your podcast is someone's diving into your podcast, someone that has you have a theme to your podcast that you're going to listen to, and people are going to listen to every week because of what you have a theme around. Someone like my podcast is, I'm all over the boat here. Like, I do interviews with other people because of the fact that I like these subjects and I want to talk to these other people. So a lot of times I'll get someone who listens to one episode then jumps off. I mean, I had a podcast, a special that came out. My friend Calvin fought in the UFC last night, and he
Oh, wow.
lost, but he was fighting in the main event. And so
Wow.
my buddy from Massachusetts, who covered him as well, used to be a sports writer in Massachusetts, and we covered his like minor league fights. And
Huh.
so when he went to fight in a big fight, I was like, "Hey man, you want to jump on the podcast and talk?" I had
Yeah.
an incredible number of listeners to that special, but none of those people are going to come back and listen to this podcast. Likely, not none of them. But like the idea that it doesn't
Right,
go,
right,
it's
right.
episodic for me. That
Typically, our audience is not UFC fighters. Usually, I don't think so.
But the idea that you have some, and then I interviewed my friend who I went to high school with, was the mayor of the city of Bangor where I live. It's like, so like you have that political episode that not everybody who's in political things are going to be into
Mhm.
Marvel things. And so like I have that, like, hopefully get up there, and then maybe there's some listeners that continue listening on. And
Right.
that's where I might be getting more idea of getting trolls on mine, because someone who listened to one may not be a fan of the
Yeah.
next one. But you're
But I
probably
feel
going
like
to get
those are
more
just
people
two different
hating.
routes.
Yes.
Right.
Those are
And I
just two
don't think
different
there's
routes when you
anything
start
wrong
a
with it.
podcast. No.
And you know, I think one of the questions I've always had for you guys from the beginning, and I haven't reached out, but like, did you guys in your minds know that this could be an end to this? Like I don't see an end to my podcast because there's always new guests that could come on. But at some point, there's 23 films that were released or going to be released by the time you guys got to it. Obviously, you knew Marvel was going to continue on with something, but then the pandemic hit. Like,
Right.
were you guys scrambling? Like, I know you guys have talked about it a little bit on your podcast, but like, and there were some things you guys did over the summer, but were you like, oh crap, we did a podcast based around the MCU and there is no MCU right now? What was the thought process behind that? Like,
I'll jump in first, Robby, and say that I was the first person to say to Robby a lot that I was like, I don't know, like, what are we going to do when this is over? Like, it'll be fun when we do the movies, but like, what's next? So I was raising that concern a lot, I would say. And then secondly, I would say that we kind of, as we started getting close to the end of our rewatch, started timing it to be like, okay, this will be perfect. We'll finish Endgame. We can do a couple wrap-up episodes, etc., and then we can dive in with Black Widow. And then we'll start figuring out what we're going to do. And then the pandemic hits and there's no Black Widow. And so, yeah, that was a little bit different for us there too. But Robby, when I had complained about like, well, what are we going to do after the 23 movies? I feel like you were the one that kind of talked me into there's new content. We could run forward with it. And so that's where I'll let you jump in.
Yeah. I mean, I think it definitely, you know, like everyone else, we had a certain plan for how the year was going to go. And I think it's actually interesting to have the conversation around kind of artistically what the next phase of Marvel is going to look like, given that it was supposed to start with Black Widow, then Falcon Winter Soldier, and then WandaVision, and, you know, just kind of how that changes the way that folks at the studio, like Kevin Feige, are viewing the narrative that they're now dealing with. But, you know, for us, it was kind of nice. I mean, we would have preferred less of a break, but we had always said,
yeah, true,
that there's a real beauty in kind of sitting in the end of Endgame,
yes.
and that it's like viewing that as one again, like complete narrative. And so I kind of like that we weren't able to just jump straight from that into something else. Again, I mean, that doesn't mean we needed necessarily like almost a year-long break, but I like that there was some space there.
We literally at the end of Endgame said, give us space. Like, I want to have to sit with the fact that, well, spoiler alert, that Tony is dead now. Like, let me have to deal with that. Well, we got the space. We really did.
Right. But yeah, you know, and there is that. We definitely had those conversations where we like had some plans to sort of start up various things around the podcast, like to correspond with the project as planned. And whenever that stuff falls through, it's a little scary, just because, yeah, I mean, I think we did Endgame in April. And, you know, now we just came out with our first new MCU content related episode at the start of January with Far From Home, which is pretty wild. But, you know, what we've just really appreciated people kind of sticking around with us, and we had fun doing some of those summer series episodes you talked about. And again, it's just,
sorry.
Oh no, it's just like, again, the community there has just been really fun for us and surprisingly supportive
timing wise with the podcast too, we used to always joke. I mean, like weekly, we would joke about, wow, we started a Marvel podcast at the worst time because we're starting a Marvel podcast the second there's no more movies. And I got to WandaVision last week and I called Robby and said, you know what? I think in hindsight, we may have started at the best time because people, when we were doing our podcast, the rewatch, I think Endgame was still in the back of their mind. And I think like going back and rewatching was such a fresh thing. And because there wasn't new content to like steal away that attention, it was like, hey, let's reflect on what they've done so much. And then you get to WandaVision, and I'm grateful that we've built up the podcast a little bit because now everybody's talking about Marvel and everybody's got takes on it. And so I think there's a lot more, I don't mean this in a bad way. There's a lot more noise now to try to get through. Right. So in hindsight, I think it actually was a blessing that we started it when we did.
And I was going to say that, like, you guys obviously didn't plan it this way, but like, if you were to come out with new episodes now, like, or you rewatch episodes now, you'd be trying to talk about Iron Man and Captain America and Captain Marvel, where the people were all talking about WandaVision. So it's like people would have to catch up to it. And on a side of running podcasts and having your own podcast, where do you want the internet to be looking for right now? You want people to be looking for WandaVision. So if you're doing an episode about WandaVision, your episode's gonna be more relevant and come up quicker. If someone Google or searches on Apple Podcasts for WandaVision, your episode will come up right away. But if you were talking about Captain Marvel right now, no one's Googling Captain Marvel because there's no relevancy to it. So I think you said it, you didn't start it at the right time, but you kind of did start it at the right time and gave all of us, like myself, we were talking about, about how my wife listens to the podcast with me, but separately, it gave us something to do. Like you were able to, get us through the pandemic. Like we watched the movies. We had someone else to do something that we enjoyed doing with that we couldn't. Like I couldn't watch movies with my friends. Like I can't go to the theater and watch movies or go places and do things with them. So I had to like do this and then have my friends, you guys talking about it, and then we talk about it, and it's just it creates that community like you guys were mentioning that is something special about fandom nowadays, and something that I wanted to say earlier, which was, Robby and I talking about comic books and us talking about superhero movies 20 years ago, we would not be popular. No one would want to talk to us. No one would want to we'd be the nerds. I mean, like, think about how much back when I was in high school and stuff like that, how much I kind of hid my Marvel fandom to try to be more popular because it wasn't popular with all my friends. All the nerds and the people that hung out in certain wing of the high school like that stuff. I'm not one of those people. Right. Now I can wear a freaking Captain America t-shirt out and not feel like people are going to make fun of me. Right. And so like, that's one of those things, starting a podcast that had anything to do with Marvel 20 years ago, no one would have given a crap. You would have been the nerds on the internet that no one cared about. And it's now it's like people actually do care about it because it's pop culture.
And it's funny you say that because, since this is a podcast about starting a podcast, whenever we started this, I really had no idea if anyone was going to listen, because I was thinking, on the one hand, if someone's a big Marvel nerd, they probably already have a place where they go for this stuff. And if they're not, then they're probably not going to ever look up this podcast. Mm-hmm. But like Kyle said, we were going for this very specific sweet spot, of people that wanted to have like this middle ground conversation where we could kind of, again, be ambassadors for this stuff. And I was even from day one, I was floored by the fact that there was this much of an audience for it. And that we've had, consistently growing numbers like that. And yeah, I mean, you're right. It's such a fun thing. And by the way, I'm not saying that because I think our podcast is like so incredible. I'm saying
cue the overthinking things. I can see it on your face.
Just to your point. Yeah. I mean, like I was even, and this was in the aftermath of Endgame being literally the biggest film of all time. And I was still like, I just don't know if anyone's going to listen to this. But yeah, it has been. I'm also glad you said that about the pandemic, because I've really so much we've heard from folks that started listening really after we had even finished the Endgame episode, and then kind of plowed through the rewatch once or multiple times throughout the last quarantine months.
One thing to add, and then I'm going to ask Justin one question, is like, maybe I'm repeating myself, but we when we started diving into it, that's the thing, Justin, is we decided that wasn't the podcast we were going to try to be. Like, we weren't going to try to be the podcast that you're talking about, the Marvel nerds from 20 years ago. Like, we aren't the podcast that dives through every screenshot and finds every little Easter egg. And what we've realized is we actually like that when our audience tells us that. Like, if you can fill us in on that stuff, that adds to our experience. And I love that. But we decided we kind of wanted to make that podcast for that middle ground, like you're saying, like for the person who has other interests too, like a brewery or sports writer, or, you know what I mean? Like just a different kind of person. And I've been pleasantly surprised at like how many people there are like that can enjoy Marvel, but also have a conversation about a video game or about, you know, something else, or, you know what I'm saying? And I want to turn around to you. Like, what was the catalyst for you starting your podcast? Cause I'm just genuinely curious.
Which is kind of funny. So the way I kind of explain it to people is I moved back to Bangor. So I lived in Massachusetts for 10 years. I moved back to the Bangor, Maine area in 2016. When I moved back to this area, I left sports. Like I was no longer writing about sports. And when I was living in Massachusetts, obviously there's way more sports than Northern Maine. And so I was like, I can't do sports writing up here unless I just cover the University of Maine. And that to me was just boring. I didn't want to do that. So I was like, I'll start a podcast. That would be fun. So I recorded one episode with my brother's band, and then I just never went further with it. And it just dropped off there. I owned the URL. I had a website. I had the logos I created because I also have a design background. And so I was like, oh, I did all that stuff. And then it just sat stagnant and never did anything with it. And then the pandemic hit. And so it was like a little bit of you guys doing yours and talking about how you guys are friends and making it. And then the introduction that I didn't even know what the word Zoom, the company Zoom was, or video, like the idea that you could record this remotely in a time where we can't be in the same room. And so like, that's where it kind of led to me to be, originally I was like, okay, I'll do this temporarily until I can meet in person. And then do it with some other people in person. And then I thought, well, maybe the future is just doing it remotely because schedules work way better when you're can sit down on a computer. I can record it. I work from home, so I can record it like on a lunch break if I need to. And so like there's ideas that like I could do all this during the pandemic. And that's when I, went on. And so the first number of episodes were like, how are you handling the pandemic? And it got kind of boring because everybody's answer was the same thing. We're tired of it and you want to move on.
You figure it out, you learn.
And so now it's getting to the point where now I'm like, then I'm reaching now into some of the sports things. So like I reached out to one of my friends who is the president of the Fort Wayne Mad Ants, which is the G League affiliate of the Indiana Pacers. He used to be the general manager of the Lowell Spinners, which is the minor league team for the Red Sox in Massachusetts. So I reached out to him. He's going to jump on the podcast. I've got friends who are my friend Devin, who's a sports it's like an athletic director kind of thing for the Arizona Coyotes. So like I have some connections now that I'm going to reach back into when I was a sports writer to kind of bring those in and do some sports stuff. And I've talked to new business owners because
if you ever want to talk Minnesota Vikings or Nashville Predators, hit me up, bro.
I was the beat writer and I wrote for the UMass Lowell Riverhawks, which is in Massachusetts. And they had a goaltender one time that played for them named Carter Hutton, who also played for the Nashville Predators. So I did interview Carter Hutton back 4 or 5 years ago to do an article on Carter Hutton when he was playing for Nashville, which was really cool. But so I just thought, doing a podcast, I like talking about certain subjects. And one of the ways I explain it is I talk about things that I like. So I like podcasting. I like Marvel Cinematic Universe and Marvel Comics. Yep. I like sports and beer and my friend, I like coffee. I have a friend that owns a coffee business. So it just got to the point where now I'm talking weekly, and I've changed it to a couple different segments. So I have 3 regular segments now, which are Movie Night, which is the movie podcast that I talk with my friend who owns Queen City Cinema Club in Bangor. I have a podcast with my comic book shop where I buy my comic books. The owner of that shop comes on and talks comic books. So we do
that's awesome.
Top 10 lists. We just did top 10 villains. And we launched with top 10 female comic book characters. I think our next is story arcs.
Oh,
and then I have a friend of mine who cleans beer draft lines. He used to be a bartender for me, but now he goes to bars and cleans their draft lines. And we talk the generic subject of beer. I mentioned earlier that I can't really do beer.
Sure.
But what we do is like we're talking now like on styles. Like we're going to talk IPAs and like what makes an IPA and not rate or judge other people's breweries, but it's more like the generic. We did top Christmas beers, and a lot of those beers we talked about are like national brands, Sierra Nevada and all the, like, we don't, not local brands or brands that I'm going to talk trash about.
Celebration ale, man.
Exactly, which is one of my top favorite Christmas beers.
Same.
And so we talked about the idea of every like 4 weeks or 5 weeks or so, I put a different podcast on that has the exact same subject. So like movies and then comics and so on, and then sprinkling guests like, you know, politician. I'm going to use his Maine state senator is going to jump on with me. And so there's a bunch of different things. So it really was the pandemic, which I think why podcasts bumped up a big time in the pandemic was we were able to stay home and do this kind of thing via video chat. So the short answer is your pandemic made me start my podcast. I
love it. As an encouragement to you, and I guess just in closing about podcasts in general, is like Robby and I, you know, well, first of all, 90% of podcasts we read don't get past 100 listeners. And I think it's because of what you said the first time with your band, right? So many people go, I want to start a podcast, and they kind of don't think a ton about what they're going to talk about, what they're passionate about, what's the topic, where I'm going to go, and just don't follow through on it. And so it kind of just dies off. Like if you Google a ton of them, like that's a ton of podcasts. So as an encouragement to you, like you're doing this, is like Robby and I weekly have the conversation where our mission statement is consistent quality content. Like, I think that's what is going to ultimately win, is that if you're putting out really quality content and like you're doing with that schedule, like sticking with it and being consistent with it. Like, I think people end up appreciating that. It might be a slow growth, a slow burn, but I think you need those things. And so kind of, like I said, as an encouragement to you, it seems like you're doing that, which is really cool. Like, and that's you're following through on doing it, and you're setting up a schedule with the things you're interested about, and the guest is going to be a thing that's a huge help to you. And so I love that.
And just talking to people that have a following, like don't talk to some random person who doesn't have a real following, because then the conversation won't go anywhere, and it won't like, there's no one will listen. And so talking to some people like that, but also putting my schedule out. And my wife, I had a guest drop off. I record usually on a Monday, and he like on Sunday night was like, I can't do it. She's like, well, just skip this week. And I was like, I can't do that. I can't do, if I'm going to do every week, I've got to do every week. Unless something serious happened where I can come out and be like, I'm in the hospital, and then they can't do that. So I ended up having to call a friend and being like, you were supposed to be on like 2 weeks, but can you come on now? It's like, yeah, sure, no problem. And so he jumped on, we moved the schedule around, and it worked out. But it's like, if I'm going to say I'm going to come out every week, then I have to come out every week. And then I also schedule myself breaks. Like I took off from the Christmas weeks.
Sure.
I take off because I'm going to work in a college town, and graduation's huge. Like we have the University of Maine's in the town I work in. I'm taking like graduation weeks off, and then obviously I'm recording. I'm trying not to skip, but like I'm having a baby as well, so like I'm trying not to like have to worry about that as much. I'm gonna. I don't think
consistent doesn't have to literally be. I don't mean like every single Monday like regimented. I just mean
I know what you mean, but like yeah. So like my thought is, if I record a couple of like those ones that have no time basis on it, like a top 10 movies thing has no relevancy to when it actually comes out. If I do any of those between now and June, and I have to skip a week, I could just throw one of those up there. That's well produced, well done, but just not relevant to current times. Like it doesn't have to be like, oh, the inauguration is on, today, and that kind of thing, which it is today, because this podcast comes out on Wednesday, so the inauguration is today.
Oh, true.
Wow.
Which is one of those weird things I talked about with my friend Mike about the MMA podcast, which we did another one about hockey, because he's a college hockey writer as well, was that inevitably, like you guys have, something comes out after you record. So there is no way possible to be current unless you do a live stream, which I don't like. Live streaming is great for like Instagram and things like that, but like doing a live broadcast, my friends do one because of their Comic-Con, did one during the pandemic because they weren't able to do their Comic-Con, and they'd get like 10 listeners at a time or watchers at a time. But if you do it pre-recorded and release it, then people can listen to it on their whenever they want.
Right.
And that's one thing I respect about you guys doing one podcast a week, and every once in a while throwing an extra one in there, is that you give me time to listen. That I don't have to listen to it on Monday. Like I don't have to listen to your WandaVision podcast until Thursday or Friday morning, really, to talk about the previous week, because you have a whole week to listen to it. So that's one of the benefits. I mean, there's other podcasts that I've listened to that come out daily, and I just get so far behind that I have to skip a bunch of them, and I just can't do it.
Well, and even some of that is, we hope that not everything we do is dated, and some of your guest stuff, not every content you're going to have is dated, right? So you could theoretically, my hope is that a year from now, if you're just finding the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you could still go back and listen to our stuff on WandaVision as we were watching it,
Right.
Which is most of what I do. And like I said, I did that special last week of the fight that had to do with that one fight, but it was a reason behind it. And it was a bonus part. It wasn't one of my numbered episodes. And so like having that ability to make it not dated is a huge thing. And that's something that Marvel's been able to do with their movies too, is that there's no relevance to the actual time. And every once in a while in certain things, they mention years, but like it's basically 20 years from now, you should be able to watch it like it just happened.
Right.
And that's something I give them credit for on that as well. But it's just, podcasting is there's a lot of them out there. But I also mentioned same thing Kevin Smith said years ago when I listened to his podcast is if you want to start one, just start one. Like, you know what I mean? And also but also put effort into it. So don't just take your phone out and record a podcast with your phone and call it good. A microphone is not that expensive. And these stupid lights that you can use, the selfie lights are not that expensive if you need a light. And just go for it and try to do your best possible you can. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, but try it because it's not that hard to physically do.
Absolutely.
As long as you know how to talk, then you can do it. So, but yeah. So, I mean, and then this meta episode about talking to someone who has a podcast is also cool because I think one of the things I think a lot of people want to know is how to do it or why people start podcasts. Not the nitty gritty is what type of microphone you have or what that kind of stuff is. It's more along the lines of why you started it. Why did you get to it? And your guys' story is cool. Friends, the whole conversation. That's a conversation. That's a story that you'll always be able to tell why you started your podcast. That's interesting. It's the idea that Endgame really started it. Which is funny. The end game started your podcast, but it's
beginning of the end game.
Beginning of the end game. So like that's the idea that you guys have, and which is pretty cool. So you guys will have this, and it will be able to live on the internet forever because as long as you pay your hosting, then you'll have the episodes will be there, which is pretty cool.
Which we'll see. I'm just kidding.
But the dated thing, you're right though. But in the same sense, like if something serious happened to the inauguration. And you didn't, when someone listens to your podcast on a Wednesday, it's like, well, why didn't they talk about that? Well, it's because it's pre-recorded, and that's my whole thought on the time relevancy is. I did a podcast about hockey, and Connor Hellebuck, who played for the UMass Little Riverhawks, won the Vezina Trophy in the NHL. The day that I recorded it, 2 hours after we recorded, that was announced. And we could have talked about it on the podcast.
Over Pecorini when he shouldn't have that 1 year, okay?
But my point was it was like news that was relevant because it was New England-based hockey, and we were talking New England-based hockey 2 hours after we recorded. This came out. I had to put a little disclaimer in the post being like, guys, I understand. You're going to call me out for not talking about it, but it was recorded 2 hours prior.
Well, and we have this problem all the time too. We talk about something and then Marvel announces all their new shows like the day after we record it. It's like, okay, well,
because they're listening.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I remember we had recorded this kind of fun, brief Avengers, the game, like on PS4, video game review. And I think the night before or 2 nights before it was supposed to premiere is when the news of Chadwick came out.
Yeah.
And that leaves you in this strange place sometimes. Cause it's like, man, this is like, how do you,
we're not putting out our Avengers Avengers game episode here where we joke around the whole time,
Yeah. And I did the same thing. We did a comic. I interviewed the guy who owns the comic book store, Paul, the day that happened as well. Again, same thing, or the next day or whatever it was.
Right.
I ended up just going on there and quickly recording a small snippet being like, just to let you know, he died after because of that. We did talk about things, but we didn't talk about him and all that stuff. And just to kind of get it out there to be like, hey, people, I understand. But this happens. But yeah, so just like Kyle says all the time, we got to keep this going. We can't go forever.
Keep it moving.
Keep it moving.
I love that. That's your tagline.
Yes. Yeah. Keep it moving. You got to keep it moving. That's what I'll be known for. Exactly. So, but I really, anything, obviously you guys can follow you guys at the FFW on all the social media that's out there.
At the FFW podcast.
Yes. It's on the screen for anybody who's watching this. But at the FFW podcast, anywhere you can do it. And you guys are on Apple, Spotify. Are you on most platforms, or are you just on the two main
Anywhere.
ones?
No,
Yeah.
all of them, I think. Yep.
Yep.
And
And
so,
then
uh,
yeah, all the
Stitcher,
social
Google
media.
Play, Amazon, that stuff. And then, yeah, the ffwpodcast.com if you want a hub for all of that.
And also I'll link in the post is on my website. I also post this. I'll link in the watch order for the
Sure.
first 3 phases and all that stuff. It's a great watch order. Like I said, my wife and I watched it. It was really good to do it in that order. One thing, disclaimer, is to not watch the post-credit scenes for most of them
Yeah.
because of it not being in the correct order that they
Mm.
released the movies. The other thing is, did you know on Disney Plus you can skip the credits now and watch the post-game?
I
Post-credit
have noticed
scenes.
that. That's a nice feature. Yeah.
I noticed that last night. I was like trying to fast forward to get to the right spot to watch the post-credit scene, and there's a little thing in the bottom that says "skip at credits," and I'm like, I wonder what that does. And I clicked it, and it went right to the beginning of one of the
Yeah,
post-credit
that's
scenes.
cool.
I was like, that's amazing. Which is, I'm surprised they haven't put them out as little snippets yet, like on Disney Plus somewhere where you can just watch the post-credit scenes
Oh,
by
yeah,
themselves.
true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And if you watch listen on Apple, review them. It helps all of us as podcast people. It gets better at the algorithms and things like that. Obviously, you can review us, but these guys are great, and they joined
Well, that
on the
too.
podcast.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no problem, guys. So, anything else you guys want to add really quickly before we like wrap this thing up? I mean, I know you guys have an episode that just came out Monday with WandaVision.
Yeah,
but
we had an episode on WandaVision, episode 1 and 2. The show will be having weekly episodes on Mondays, kind of covering WandaVision, and then eventually Falcon and the Winter Soldier and Loki and stuff like that. And then, yeah, if you're interested in the rewatch at the FFW podcast or the ffwpodcast.com, there's a link there for the rewatch where you can click on the movies in our order and including the credit things you're talking about. We actually have an image where we edit where you don't want to watch the credits or whatever. And then you can go back and listen to our corresponding episode if you want. That's still there from season 1. So that's all I'd add. But thanks for having us. It's been a blast, and
it's
you know,
fun.
we love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fun to talk about, podcasts on a podcast, because you guys try not to talk about your podcast on your podcast. You talk about what you're trying to talk about. But yeah, so it's fun to do this. I really appreciate you guys coming on. That's Kyle and Robby from the Friends from Work podcast. I really appreciate it again. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, appreciate it.